Namaskaram. Let's begin with three chants of Aum as always. Today happens to be the birthday or Jayanti of Swami Shivananda of the Divine Life Society of Rishikesh, who was in his original life Dr. Kuppuswamy MBBS, who practiced in Malaysia, and before that he grew up and had his education in Tamil Nadu. In particular, he was born in Pattamadai village of Tirunelveli district, or Mavattam as we call it in Tamil, in the state of Tamil Nadu. And this great young doctor, after having served a lot of sick and poor in the Malaya region, one fine day decided to give it all up, a roaring medical practice, and go to the banks of river Ganga to do a service of an entirely different kind, a service of humanity at the spiritual level. He didn't stop his medical activities though. He had a clinic of his own at his ashram and served a lot of patients, many of them lepers, etc., with very serious conditions. But his yeoman service is remembered not only for the medical, but far, far more than that, for the delivery of hundreds, literally hundreds of books in very simple English and translated to many other languages, both Indian and foreign, to reach out to people who are not at all exposed to spirituality and religion, to give them a taste of what it is and the inspiration for what made him to give up medical profession into taking up a spiritual profession. To celebrate that great Swami, we will start with a short bhajan involving his name and his disciples Swami Chidananda, Swami Krishnananda, and Swami Saravana Bhavananda, who in his Purva Sannyasa ashram happens to be my Puja grandfather, maternal grandfather, Swami Saravana Bhavananda, about whom I have written an ode too that many of you have read already. Now, coming to that, a small short bhajan involving his name, followed by one of the prayers written by him. Many prayers that he had written, this particular one became quite popular. Many others became popular too, but this is with the English speaking population became quite popular, and you'll see why when I recite it. So let's begin. Shivananda, 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 pahi mam. Chidananda, 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 rakshamam. Shivananda, 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 pahi mam. Chidananda, 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 rakshamam. Krishnananda, 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 Pahi Mam. Saravana Bhavananda, Saravana Bhavananda, Saravana Bhavananda, Rakshamam. Bolo Shri Shivananda Maharaj Ki Jai. O adorable Lord of mercy and love, salutations and prostrations unto Thee. Thou art omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Thou art Sat, Chit, Ananda. Thou art the indweller of all beings. Grant us an understanding heart, equal vision, balanced mind, faith, devotion, and wisdom. Grant us inner spiritual strength to resist temptations and to liberate the mind. Free us from false identities, lust, greed, anger, and hatred. Fill our hearts with divine virtues. Let us behold Thee in all these names and forms. Let us serve Thee in all these names and forms. Let us ever remember Thee. Let's ever sing Thy glories. Let Thy name be ever on our lips. Let us abide in Thee for ever and ever. Aum Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Those of you who are familiar with this so-called universal prayer might have seen that I made a couple of changes purposely. One of them is that where Swami Shivananda has written control the mind, I have changed it to liberate the mind, because it's impossible to control the mind, as we already discussed, and it was just a poor translation into English of our Vedic knowledge at those times to call it control of the mind when it's actually to liberate the mind. The other change that I made, if you noticed, those of you already know the universal prayer of Swami Shivananda, is that I mentioned, instead of the word free us from ego, I mentioned free us from our false identities. And this again I have discussed in one of our previous episodes of Kids, where I've talked about ego being the fall guy and somebody that we blame, whether we know it exists or not. We just blame it whenever we do something which is unpleasant, and we tend to take the credit whenever we do something that is pleasant. So that's the funny thing that we do to absolve ourselves of all the unpleasantries. That's living just half the life, isn't it? So the more truthful Sat way of living would be to recognize the original word for this ego in the Sanskrit literature, or more so the Vedic Bhasha, which is ahamkara. That is giving a kara or form, akara, to the aham. When you give an akara to aham, it becomes ahamkara. You give a form to what you call as myself. In reality, you know that myself is the Atman or Parabrahman. But as we are embodied, we need to fulfill various chores in our life, day-to-day chores, as well as various other events that we participate in, be it in the family or in the larger circle of society or our profession, or even in the nation building or the entire humanity or the world itself. In all these situations, we need to take certain identity, and that is ahamkara. As long as we perform that identity with the body, mind, intellect, and life breath, knowing fully well that we really are the self, but we are acting out a particular thing temporarily, then we have the immense ability to perform it to the best of our abilities and capabilities, and things turn out to be far more efficient and effective. But when we get too identified with those temporary identities of, let's say, I'm a doctor, I'm an engineer, I'm a father, I'm a mother, or I'm a child to somebody, or I am Indian, or I'm a male person, a man, or I am a Tamilian, or I am, all these kinds of identities are temporary identities, either anatomical or psychological or physiological or intellectual or professional or familial. We need to fulfill all of them effectively and efficiently. That's possible if and only if we keep recognizing that they are temporary identities and our real identity is that of the omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, and eternal Brahman or Atman. And all those four words defining the Atman, or defining Brahman, even if it amounts to defiling it, were there in the universal prayer. But the word ego was there. Free us from our ego. No, we cannot free ourselves from our ego until our point of death. So instead of calling it ego, ahamkara, I've called it as false identities, by which of course I mean temporary identities. So free us from these temporary identities. We do not want to take too many of them for too long. Let us get back to our real identity of the self, Atman or Brahman. So that's essentially what are the two small changes. The other parts of the universal prayer are self-explanatory. Those of you who are new to it, who are not familiar with Swami Shivananda or the Divine Life Society, they have a beautiful website. You can look it up. Even in my PhD thesis, I've listed this universal prayer. So those of my students and colleagues who are watching this, you can always pick up my thesis to look up the universal prayer, in which, of course, at that time I didn't have these kinds of spiritual awakenings. So I would have listed false identities still as ego, the original version of Swami Shivananda. I would have listed the liberation of the mind still as controlling the mind, because I thought at that point of time, 22 years back, that maybe it was possible. But with experience, I've recognized that it's impossible to control the mind. And what we are doing currently is to actually see that we are liberating the mind and regulating those desires, which brings us back to what we were doing yesterday. We ended up by looking at the first two of the 8 limbs of the yoga propounded or summarized or presented in an abstract form by Patanjali Maharishi. Pat-anjali, as we already saw, is the pathfinder who surrenders to the path and offers this pathway to us of Raja Yoga. We already talked about Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, we talked about Jnana Yoga, and we talked about Raja Yoga, which is what Patanjali Maharishi's Ashtanga Yoga is all about. And then, of course, Sānkhya Yoga, where we combine all of these together. Coming back to the Raja Yoga of Patanjali Maharishi, it's into 8 limbs, of which we saw the first 2, which was Yama and Niyama. We said Niyama is rules and Yama is essentially the regulation. So rules and regulations. Rules and regulations which are our own, not imposed on us by somebody else as if they are commandments from a so-called God whom we don't even know whether he or she exists or not. It is essentially the rules and regulations of the game called life that we play, which evolve. And we said that there are 5 each of the yamas and niyamas, which combined together are just some very basic principles, like all the rules and regulations are my own. I am responsible for everything. All that there is right now is the way it is. It cannot be in any other way. And I am not the body, I am not the mind, but I am a mother to the entire universe. So these beautiful concepts encompass and go at the very root of the issues, and therefore we do not need to specifically follow the rules and regulations, because once we act out according to these 5 principles of life, the facts, the truth, then what happens is all those 5, like Satya, Himsa, Brahmacharya, Asteya, Aparigraha, etc. All those 10 yamas and niyamas automatically get fulfilled. Why? Because if I'm a mother to the entire universe, obviously everybody in the universe is my child. And will I steal from my child? So do I need to be told asteya or non-stealing separately? Do I need to be told aparigraha, not to hoard everything for myself, all the food for myself, not give it to the others? Do I need to be told that all the wealth for myself, not to others? No, they are my children. I'm creating them every moment and recreating them every other moment in my own sensual apparatus, or the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, or the skin. They're all collecting information, data from outside, projecting it inside, and the brain is making it all up. So everything is my own creation. Everything is your own creation, whatever you're seeing, whether it's this video or in your real life. And so how do we actually take all of these things into account is what yoga helps us, because yoga is union, to recognize in an all-inclusive embrace that we are one. And if at all we need to make a distinction, it's in the sense of I am the mother and the world is its child, and therefore whatever I do to myself, I would do to the world, and probably in an even better way, because you usually care for your child even more than what you care for yourself. So that's the essence of this particular yama and niyama. Those are the first two limbs which we already covered in detail through various examples in the previous episode. Those who missed it can go back and watch the previous episode, that is episode number 6. Today's is episode number 7. Now, in this 7th episode, we are going to go further in the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali Maharishi. Having done Yama and Niyama, we are going to go into Asana and Pranayama. Pranayama we may not completely finish today, at least in the summarized version, even in the summarized version that we are doing in this particular Discourse of Kids series. But we will see how much of it can be encompassed today. So let's start with asana. This is something that many people both in the East and West are now very familiar with the introduction of the International Day of Yoga on June 21st every year, officially accepted by more than 160 countries, which is picked up in a really big way from 2015 onwards. So people think that asana is yoga, and this is very unfortunate, because first of all, Raja Yoga is only one part. You also have Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, and all of them put together along with Raja Yoga become Sānkhya Yoga. But we have seen that within Raja Yoga itself there are 8 limbs. So already we are 1/4 in Raja Yoga, and in that 1/4 we are further 1/8 to go to the asana. It's like 132, 1/32, or just about 3% is what we are looking at and calling that as yoga. No. There's far more to yoga than just asanas. And most of the asanas have been brought into the picture mostly by observing nature around us, be it the human babies, what kind of mudras they make while they're just lying down on their beds, or animals, different kinds of animals, what all natural poses they get into by very, very keen observation of all kinds of animals, all of whose genes are actually within us as well, including the brain. We have the reptilian brain, etc., which is at the core, whereas the outer one is the one which is kind of distinctive of a human being, as opposed to the inner core, which is very similar to the brains of reptiles, and leave alone the further evolutions after that. So what we are talking about here is to see that we go beyond the asanas, but we need to understand the asana. It's a very important limb. It comes right at the third position after you have understood the rules and regulations of this game called life, so that you play it very well. You don't play with the rules and regulations of yet another game. I gave you the example of basketball and for soccer yesterday. You can't play soccer with basketball rules or vice versa. Whichever game you are in, you have to play with the rules and regulations of that game. And our game is life, and each of us, because we have identified with different bodies, different minds, different intellects, and different life breaths. Maybe not so much the life breath, but at least up to the intellect level, the BMI, body, mind, intellect, we have lots of distinctions, and we are evolving as well, changing, and our bodies are not the same, losing out so many cells, gaining new cells. The mind is not the same. It's again gathering a lot of emotions based on various circumstances and situations, more from the outside than inside. The intellect also is gathering data and processing it through reasoning, logic, etc. So each one of us has been exposed to different sets of data, and we have accumulated different sets of data. We have processed it in different ways, be it the physical data, the psychological data, or the intellectual data, and based on that our BMIs are in different states currently. So when we are talking of asana, it's primarily targeting the body, the physical body, but its repercussions are there in all the other levels, be it the mind, the intellect, the life breath, or even the self. So how do we actually look at this asana? Of course, each school of yoga has its own way of bringing out which are the asanas which are most important, etc. But we always go back to one of the most authoritative sources. Rather than calling it authoritative, we'd call it something which is trustworthy, because there's no such thing as an authority or a conclusion in this, because those are essentially death. So what we are talking about is somebody who has been through it, experienced it, Patanjali Maharishi, who's come up with such short things with so much of compassion for us, the fast generation, so to speak, very well tailored for us actually. And in his, we already saw, like for example, the first chapter being just Atha Yoga, then Yoga, when you have tried everything else and it's not succeeded. Similarly with Yama and Niyama, just five points, there are 5 words that he gives for each one of them. Now coming to asana, the way he looks at it is that which is thiram and sukham iti asana. That means that which makes you stable and comfortable at the physical or body level, that is asana. Because you do not want the body to become a hindrance or a disturbance when you go to the higher levels or higher dimensions, or the rather than call it higher, I would say subtler, because the body is the grossest of the dimensions, made out of the physical entities of the earth, air, water, fire, air, the panchabhutas, including of course space and time to a small extent. So this thing which comes from that and goes back to that at birth and death is essentially our physical body. And when we go to the mind, for example, it's a little more subtle. It's made out of our emotions. Without emotions there's no mind, as we already saw. So but if we want to work on the mind, or we want to work on the intellect, or we want to work at the life breath level, or all these levels, you need to ensure that the grosser level of you, that is the physical body, doesn't become a stumbling block. And how do you go about doing that? If and only if your body is in a stable condition, that is, it's not changing its position every now and then, and it's comfortable. It is in a position where there are no aches, there is a absolute balance. So when balance comes, stability comes almost automatically, and the balance is there, the geometrical perfection of symmetry, that once you bring it in, you know that you are comfortable as well. There are no pains and aches and itches and this and that our body is familiar with when you're doing various things, whether important or unimportant. But if we get into a so-called asana, whatever that asana might be, it is always thiram and sukham. It is stable and it is comfortable. If some posture that you get into, even if somebody else calls it an asana, and either you're not comfortable or you are not stable, you're shaky, or you're feeling discomfort, then it's not really an asana for you. So you recognize what is an asana for you. And for most people, it's the Vajrasana that I was sitting in the previous episode. You might recollect yesterday's episode in Kids 6. In Kids 7, I'm sitting in what is known as an Ardha Siddhasana, which is a very, very useful and comfortable posture for a lot of yogic practices. And this is, as the name suggests, half a Siddhasana, what a Siddha would do, a perfected soul would do, a powerful soul would do. It's just half of that, but this is good enough for us who are into it at least just part-time. But as we go forward, we might have to move from the Ardha Siddhasana to the Siddhasana. How do you do the Ardha Siddhasana? You just have to put the left heel of your feet at your Mooladhara chakra, that is at the base of your spine, between your genitals and your anus. And that particular position is very, very conducive to bringing the stability. Already we have talked about Mooladhara as the root and the foundation, and therefore the stability is associated with that. Patience is associated with that, and patience can come only in comfort. You can be, if you're in complete discomfort, very difficult for you to be patient. Not impossible though, as we shall see when we further evolve in our spiritual practices. But knowingly you do not want to make the body a disturbance in this whole process, and therefore you sit into these comfortable positions. And why is the left heel so important? We know the Mooladhara chakra is important, it's associated with stability, etc. But why is put the left heel there? Why not the right heel? The left heel is something which has a lot of acupressure and acupuncture points of great significance, because it's also known as the Achilles heel. And this Achilles heel you would have seen in many movies, Hollywood movies like Troy, etc., how significant it is. But way before that, Krishna, as it's said in both the Srimad Bhagavatam as well as the Mahabharata, left his physical body after about living a wonderful life of about 120-125 years. He left the body when he was just relaxing in the forest, and a hunter's arrow accidentally hit his left heel, and because of which he just passed away. So it's that significant. Our life energy connection is there significantly at the left heel. Never ever underestimate the power of your heel, especially the left one, which of course is associated also with the Ida Nadi. If you go further down, I've only been talking about till the Mooladhara chakra, but there are many chakras below the Mooladhara chakra, and those chakras are associated with our tamasic gunas. So I'm assuming that many of us who are watching this series are already able to handle their tamasic characteristics, that is lethargy, laziness, procrastination, then let's say inertia, and these kinds of things, oversleeping, etc. These are things that are typically called as asuric gunas, gunas of the those who are not suras, who are opposite of suras, are asuras. And we, I assume, have grown out of that even through regular training of life, that is Jagat Guru, the world being a guru for us, has trained us to get out of these lethargy, out of this laziness, out of this procrastination, out of this inertia, that is a tendency to be in whatever state we want, just sinking into the comfort zone and not coming out of it. If you're watching a spiritual series like this, I'm sure you have handled that to a great extent. So we are already at the Mooladhara, and we are trying to progress further. So that's essentially what we are talking about in asana, something that is comfortable, something that is stable. It could be Vajrasana for some people, it could be Ardha Siddhasana like what we are doing right now, Siddhasana, it could be Padmasana, It could be any other posture in which you can sit for a fairly long period of time. What is a reasonable period of time? That varies from person to person depending upon our background, our age, our health condition, etc. So feel free. Don't try to overstretch yourself right at the beginning, but gradually increase. If you're able to sit in an Ardha Siddhasana for 5 minutes today, maybe you could do that for 10 minutes tomorrow, and you keep on doubling that, and easily, quickly you reach about an hour or so without much of a discomfort, without much of an issue. So that's what you have to try and keep doing. And I hope this recording is still going on. I need to confirm that. Yes, it's going on. I have a remote in my hand through my Apple Watch, and that brings me to a very important point, that our hand is a remote to our entire life. Yes, and that's why we've been talking about the body, mind, intellect, the life breath, and the soul, all contained within this. And then in my diagrams, you would have also seen the Ida and Pingala. In one of the episodes, episode 5, I had shown it what happens when it reaches the brain, that is the right hemisphere becomes the Ida, and the left hemisphere becomes the Pingala. But until the Agnya Chakra, all this while right to the Muladhara and below as well, this Ida and Pingala are interchanged, and the Ida is on the left, that's the feminine, and Pingala is on the right. But what I have shown in the episode 5 is after the Agnya Chakra, what happens when it goes to the brain, because we were discussing a lot of things related to the intellect and the rationality, etc. over there. But if you want to look at chakras below the Agnya and the various attributes up to Muladhara or even below, then you need to look at Ida as the left and Pingala as the right. Ida is what is known as the Chandra Nadi, and Pingala is what is known as the Surya Nadi. But if you have at the Agnya or above to Sahasrara, the Matrupitru Chakra, or even the Guru Gayatri Chakra, then you need to look at it in the opposite way. That is, Ida is on the right and Pingala is on the left. So in other words, the masculine and feminine join, become the Ardhanarishwara Tattva, and fulfill each other's roles. It's so beautiful when you act out of that level. We will all reach that particular level, we will see as we proceed even in these sessions, the way we are going to mix up the practical and the theoretical aspects. So that's as far as asana goes. I can demonstrate many different asanas, but that's besides the point, because essentially what you are going to do is very similar to what the asanas are being taught by many other wonderful yoga gurus, far more experienced and professional and experts than me. And so I would leave it to them, and many of these wonderful videos are also available on YouTube for free, and you can take a look at many of those as well. But we will also see how in our approach of Sānkhya Yoga, we will involve these asanas for the body, the pranayama for the breath, the bhakti yoga that we are going to keep on introducing through the various shlokas and other things that we are going to be talking about, and the divine entities at our various chakras when we operate out of them, the bhakti yoga, then the jnana yoga, the intellectual path of reasoning, trying to understand the truth, Sat Chit Ananda, at the very intricate level, dissecting and then putting it back together, because the intellect works with dissection, but it's far beyond that. So coming back to asana for the physical body, I was telling you, not only this Apple Watch, but the whole hand is a remote control. Just like you use a remote for your TV to change the volume, to change the channel, or to change the input device to the television, or you increase the brightness, contrast, etc. Everything you do with the remote. You don't need to go and touch the TV at all, right? Even powering it on and off, everything at the remote control. Same way, your hands are wonderful remote controls, and that's where mudras become very significant indeed. The Nyana Mudra, for example, is where the life breath or the air element and the intellect or the fire element come together. You know that without air a fire is not possible, because fire needs oxygen to burn, which is in the air element, and therefore the more the air, you see that in windy conditions even forest fires pick up very quickly, and huge portions of forests are burnt out. So the air vayu, which is in the which is a dikpalaka for the northwest direction, and the fire, which is the dikpalaka or agni, vayu and agni is the dikpalaka for the southeast direction. They are diagonally opposite to each other because they work in a team as a partnership, and that's what we are bringing in here together. In other words, the life breath and the intellect have to be in partnership, and that's why when you are talking about the life breath, it is universal. Remember, like the soul, which is Brahman itself, that is also universal. Life breath is also universal. We talked about a patra, etc., in one of the episodes earlier. And that patra, this vessel that you're having, you're emptying itself into the atmosphere, which is so much bigger and vast compared to the size of the volume that our lungs can have internally to contain the air as a container or patra. But essentially, this is not our real patra, the lungs at the physical level, but the entire atmosphere of the earth, which is our patra. And compared to this is like an akshaya patra. We have far more air than any one of us can hold inside of ourselves. Though there are lots of mythological stories about taking in all of that air and then giving out to convey some very, very intricate things, not in a physical level, but in a much more subtle or intellectual level. So now, even causal levels for that matter. So now what are you doing in this? You are subjecting your intellect, which is essentially a sharp tool, a fiery tool, which is made out of the fire element to a large extent, which operates essentially at the Manipuraka chakra, which has the characteristics of Manikanta, Swami Sharanamayappa, Dharmashastra, full of righteousness, with its spouses of, which is essentially its power of Swaha and Swadha. So, and that Dharma Devata, or the goddess of righteousness or duty consciousness, now you're bringing that kind of a intellect which is finite. Just like the body is finite, mind is finite, bigger than the body but still finite. Intellect is bigger than both of them but still finite. But that intellect now, which is finite, you are bringing it into touch with the life breath or prana, which is almost infinite. What would happen? Now your intellect, which was your individual intellect, becomes the universal intelligence. And that's a huge shift, shifting from any finite number, however large, any finite size, however large, any finite volume, however large, to anything which is infinity, is just not just orders of magnitude difference, but a whole different ball game, because now you're using this Nyana Mudra to access the Vijnana or wisdom of the entire universe. And that's why the Nyana Mudra is so very significant, because now the intellect has identified itself with, by combining with the life breath, it has identified itself with the universal intelligence rather than the individual intellect. And this prana is only at the gross level, it is just the breath. Otherwise it is prana, apana, vyana, udana, samana. It's consisting of 5 different subtler and subtler things, of which vyana being the most subtle. Typically when a person dies, the prana leaves in about 2.5 hours, whereas the others are much slower, and the slowest of them all is Vyana, which leaves after about 11 days or in some cases 13 days, etc. Which is why we perform the Tithi or let's say the Karyam or Devisham and things like that. We perform typically a 11th day ceremony or a 13th day ceremony, because that's when the person has truly left entire in all its entirety. And that's why prana is used not only to talk about breath at the grossest level, level, but also about life itself. That's why even in local languages, like for example in Kannada, we say, if somebody has passed away, we say aurdu prana hoitu. That means his prana has left or her prana has left. What essentially it means is that they have done their last exhalation at a gross level, but they are talking of a much more fundamental level. Prana, apana, vyanodana, samana, saprana. So that 5 levels of prana, all of them have left, and that's when the true death happens. So that prana, how you regulate, is what Patanjali Maharishi teaches us through Pranayama. You already saw the first two limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, that it is yama and niyama, right? Niyama is rules and yama is regulation. That same word yama is coming with prana also, saying it is prana yama. That means you are regulating, or doing yama, or regulating what? Your life energy itself. That though in the grossest sense it is breath, it's fundamentally, it's the vital energy, it's the life energy. That's what we call as prana, apana, vyanodana, samana, saprana. And that essentially you are regulating in such a way. In the simplest sense, the pranayama would be to take as few breaths as possible every minute, which means that your breaths have to be long, deep, and relaxed. And once you have taken as much of an inhalation as possible, without discomforting yourself at any part of your body, having taken the inhalation, you're retaining it for a few comfortable seconds, and then releasing it again gradually, very slowly, deep, long exhalation. And then you get into a state of vacuum, just like in a vacuum cleaner, when you remove something out, it's a state of nothingness, or shunya we call it. Just like the fullness is called kumbha, associated with a kalasa. When we welcome somebody who is like a great rishi, or when we perform certain homas and yajnas and pujas, we keep a kalasham and invoke the gods and goddesses into that from, of course, our own body, prana pratishta, and then we pray. So that is also called a kumbha. A purna kumbha is a full kumbha, and that's essentially what this is. And when we retain our inhalation inside, that is called as purna and kumbha and kumbhaka. And then when it comes out, it is the shunya or shunyaka. Essentially we are emptying it out completely. So in the beginning it may not be possible to hold the kumbhaka and shunyaka, that is either the in-breath or the complete vacuum state, for very long. It's okay, you do how much ever it is comfortable for you, but slowly start reducing the speed of all of these, and the total cycle of one inhalation, one retention, and then exhalation and retention of the vacuum. This is one full cycle of 4 steps. Try to make it as long a duration as possible, so that in 1 minute you are having as few breaths as possible. In fact, it is said, when we say ayus, or in Tamil, or ayush in or ayu in Sanskrit, which we say is the lifetime of about 120 years. More than years, it is actually counted in the number of breaths. So even though you might have a full life of 120 years, you might live for much lesser, because you're breathing much faster than necessary. You're breathing much more slower than necessary. So again and again I keep checking this camera to make sure that the recording is going on, because I can see the camera over here, that the display being on the other side I cannot see, and there's nobody else helping me out with this recording, because from today I've moved on to a mode where some of the participants required certain privacy, and therefore I'm doing a separate session for the live participants, and then coming back and doing this. The way I do these things is in a spontaneous flow, extempore, and not preparing for it, or learning or reading up something. No, it just comes out because of my own experiences. So what I might have said there to them, the live participants, there might be a lot of things which I may not be saying here, and many things that I'm saying here I may not be saying there. But to respect their request for privacy, I have made those videos on YouTube as private unlisted videos, and making this as public so that it's available to everybody. So as far as possible, I will try to include whatever I've said there over here as well, but it might so happen that I miss out, but no worries, because I'll probably cover that again in one of the future episodes. I'll just go with the flow, because that way I'm gelling my life with your life, because there's no such thing as my life and your life. It's our life, and that is what the Nyana Mudra, many of these aspects I didn't talk about in the private session that I had, and they can also see this to probably imbibe some of these things. So if you look at this Nyana Mudra, depending upon how you keep this hand after getting into Nyana Mudra, whether you keep it with the palm facing upwards or the palm facing downwards, again there are lots of differences, because when you do it downwards, you're basically making sure that the energy flow is more towards the lower lobes of the lungs, and therefore to the lower parts of the body as well. And if you're talking of in terms of the gunas, to more towards the tamasic gunas, etc. When you're making it upwards, it's more towards the rajasic, and then the sattvic and the triguna-tita stage of going beyond all the gunas as well. So essentially this is a remote control, as I said. And why the right and the left are both equally important is that we saw that the Ida is associated with the left and the Pingala is associated with the right. In other words, the feminine is associated with this. All the energies are associated with this. Whereas it's all the actual material that is associated with this. And material and energy, or material and geometry, have to come together. The mantra and the yantra have to come together in a technology called tantra, and that's what makes us pavitra. And this yātrā is so very beautiful. It becomes extra pavitra yātrā, as I called in one of the previous episodes. And similarly, then there is the so-called, after this Nyana Mudra, which is also called as Chin Mudra by some people. There is something called the Chinmaya Mudra, which raises the consciousness a little further up to the middle lobes of the lungs in terms of respiration, and therefore the middle parts of the body, etc., both in the physical as well as the subtle. And then there is something called the Adhi Mudra. All of these, of course, we do it by keeping the palm facing upwards, but I'm just showing it to you so that it's very clear as to what is actually done in each one of these. So the Adhi Mudra is for the upper lobes of the lungs, and therefore it caters to the upper part of the body, especially above the neck. The Chinmaya Mudra is more towards the, let's say, the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, etc. Whereas the digestive system and legs, etc., are handled by this. The hands are handled by this. And then you go further to the region of the neck and above to the head, etc. This is what the Adhi Mudra handles that. And eventually you talk about what is known as the Meru Dhanda for the spinal cord, through which in the Sushumna Nadi, the Kundalini Shakti, we would like it to flow beautifully upward and downward directions when we are sitting in a vertical position in stable and comfortable asana, be it the Ardha Siddhasana, Padmasana, Vajrasana, whatever. When we are sitting in that and doing it, it's amazing. And all of these, the remote control is in your own hands. Yes, and it's a free remote control. And so really take good care of your hands, because it's all in your hands. And these hands we shall utilize in the best possible way. Already I told you what the Chin Mudra or Nyana Mudra does. It brings the intellect in touch with the life breath, and because of which the individual intellect becomes the universal intelligence. And in the next step, what happens in the Chinmaya Mudra, you are basically bringing these so that you are forgotten your body consciousness is gone, your psychological consciousness is gone, and your self is integrated with them, so that the disturbance, whatever they were causing through various emotions through various aches and itches, etc. All of them are gone, taken away, kidnapped or hare by the soul along with them, leaving us with just the universal intelligence to be identified with, and a perfect way to do Jnana Yoga of reasoning and logic, to intellectually come up with the understanding, or more with the intelligence rather, because the intellect is dissolved into the intelligence. Through the universal intelligence, we are trying to understand what we are, what the universe is, and the correlation between them and the oneness between them eventually. So that's exactly what is called Chinmaya, and that's why the Chinmaya mission and things like that, Swami Chinmayananda, it's an amazing concept, where you do Jnana Yajnas, for which Swami Chinmayananda and many of his disciples like Swami Tejomayananda and etc. have been very popular for giving discourses on the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which is the milk of that Upanishads as a cow, and the milker being, of course, Sri Krishna, who delivered the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. He has delivered, of course, the Uddhava Gita to Uddhav and things like that. There are many other sources, but the original source is the Upanishads or the Vedanta, the end of the Vedas, from which all of this knowledge comes. The wonderful packaging which is being done by the Chinmaya Mission, Ramakrishna Mission, the Isha Foundation, the Art of Living Foundation, the Amrita Group, the pat-anjali Yoga Peeth of Baba Ramdev, etc. All these are packaged in very beautiful ways, attractive ways for the current generation, so that we can easily engage in these things. But remember that the core content in all of their cases is the Vedas. The Veda is the original source of all of these, and in particular the knowledge and wisdom comes from the last portion of the Vedas called the Veda Anta, or the end of the Vedas, or which is essentially the essence of the Vedas in the form of knowledge and wisdom, especially the Upanishads, which means Upanishad. You're sitting close to the Guru and trying to gain that knowledge, not through word of mouth, because most of these are conveyed through silence. I would also like to convey it through silence, which is essentially called as a transmission process. But we need to prepare our body, mind, intellect, etc. To such a level that beyond that, yes, I can do the transmission for you, initiate you into the spiritual practices. So till that, we need words to communicate with each other, after which we'll get into silence. You know that I took a break of a 42-day silence, and the kind of experience I had then is completely indescribable. And though I enjoy thoroughly when I'm delivering a discourse like this, but nothing of this joy is comparable to the joys of silence. And we will all see that. I will take you through that journey day by day, little by little, gentle steps. With gentle steps we cannot reach infinity, so at one point of time we will stop these gentle steps, because our body will be ready by then, our mind will be ready by then, our intellect will be ready by then, our life breath will be ready by then. We'll directly jump into the self. So that last jump or leap that we take will be from the finite to the infinite, and it will just happen instantaneously. Nothing would be required, just that we should ensure these guys don't become disturbances, hindrances, or stumbling blocks, as I've called it already. Now, so that's essentially the Chinmaya Mudra, where you're trying to achieve everything through pure Jnana Yoga and Raja Yoga alone. So your Sānkhya Yoga, or the integral yoga, is not involving any bhakti or karma yoga. That's the same with the Chin Mudra as well as the Chinmaya Mudra. Just that here these are still in an observant sense, as witnesses. The body is still witnessing what is happening at the life, breath, and intellect level. The the mind, or the psychological entity of ours is also watching it, witnessing it. But then all those witnesses vanish along with the self, to let the universal intelligence discuss the self in all its true glory. And then what happens? Once that knowledge is obtained, you no longer need your intellect. You basically pack it up and the intellect goes inside and gets covered by all the other dimensions. The intellect becomes the core because that intellect is now washed, not brainwashed, mind you, not whitewashed, but blackwashed into nothingness, into the Shiva Tattva. Shiva is that which is not or nothingness, and that Shiva Tattva or the core around which everything else wraps itself in a tight embrace, and that is your Adhi Mudra, the ancient mudra, that which doesn't have a beginning, that which doesn't have an end, and is therefore eternal. And that's what we help to activate the Ajna chakra, and automatically the Sahasrara chakra, the Matru Pitru chakra, and the Guru Gayatri chakra. All of these happen automatically. You don't need to do anything. It's just the Ajna chakra. You work a little bit with this Adhi Mudra, and once that flow has happened, you want to maintain that smooth flow up and down. Up and down don't have a distinction in that up is great or down is great, because you keep moving to different levels of your existence depending upon the necessities, and coming down is not something bad. It's after having touched it all and coming back to the other chakras to carry out your duties through the body, mind, intellect, etc. So once that Adhi Mudra is done, energizing the Ajna chakra, we get into back into what is called as the Merudanda. The intellect comes back. It had gone into the core. Now it comes back. These are still wrapped around, wrapping around nothingness, not even the universal intelligence. Now the universal intelligence is taking all its glory, and when we are acting out of the other chakras, whether it's the Mooladharas, patience and understanding and wisdom, you are acting out of the universal intelligence. Whether you are acting out of the Swadhisthana chakras, valor, courage and things like that, keen perception, etc., all of that you are again acting out of your universal intelligence. That's when you truly become Ganesha and Muruga. Then you become Ayyappa and are showing the duty consciousness out of your universal intelligence. Then you are coming to the Anahata chakra and showcasing your prosperity for the welfare of all, the ability to maintain, preserve and sustain the entire universe apart from your own various dimensions. So then you go further and showcase your creativity through the Saraswati Brahma principle, having looked at the Lakshmi Narayana already. So you have become Lakshmi Narayana, you have become Saraswati Brahma, and then the art, creativity, the communication skills, the ability to listen. Most important part of the communication skill is listening skills. Without listening, a lot of people just go on talking. But no, the listening is so much more important. Only then you start talking from the universal intelligence, and then you get the license to talk, give a discourse like what I am doing. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa says that nobody can just become a guru just like that. You have to get the call of God, like how I have from my interiority, and therefore I've started this kids series to benefit those who are beginning on the spiritual path, so that they can go to where they have never ever been. And that is not the final frontier, but it's the infinite frontier. And we say space is the final frontier, let's say in Star Trek or something like that, but here you far beyond space-time, which is just at the Ajna chakra. You've gone to the Vishuddha chakra, and you've gone to the Ajna chakra, and at the Ajna chakra, it's a total perception of reality as it is. That's the mysticism, the tantra takes over, and then to the Sahasrara, where you encounter the nothingness of dark energy or Mahakali integrated with dark matter, or Rudra, Shiva, Mahadeva. I mean, once you're there, all words stop. It's silence, absolute silence. But still, out of your own evolution, You then start looking at your pitrus and matrus, your ancestors, and go beyond that to the Guru Tattva of Gayatri. Aum Bhu, Aum Bhuvaha, Augum Swaha, Aum Mahaha, Aum Janaha, Aum Tapaha, Augum Satyam, Aum Tatsavithur Varenyam, Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhyo Yonaha Prachodayat, and then come down Aum Apo Jyoti, Raso Amrutam, Brahma Bhu Bhuva Swarom. It's fantastic. The downward journey is as beautiful and as engaging and as lovely and as useful for oneself and for every other self, because there's only one called ourself, as much as the upward motion of the Kundalini Shakti. So never think of this as up and down, as one being superior to the other. No, you have to keep going, getting this going in a cycle, so that the kind of joys that you have witnessed, let everyone else witness as well. Because this is not the joy of the kind which is happiness versus sadness, but this is the ultimate joy at the soul level, which is called as bliss or ecstasy. And once you have touched that, it's just spilling out of you. The amrita is spilling out of you for everybody to take a sip. And whatever kind of forums we get in order to share this, the better. It may or may not reach and sink into and to benefit in the entirety the way it has benefited me, but whatever little difference it can make a huge difference even in your mundane lives of the family, society, profession, education, whatever the hell you have been involved with, society, nation building, humanity building, taking care of other living beings, or even non-living things. Whatever creative activities you're doing, whatever maintenance activities you're doing, whatever dissolving activities you're doing, everything was benefited by just this wisdom, and bringing this wisdom to practice. And that's why the remote control of your hand is very important. The mudras are very important. We just discussed 4 mudras. There are many others like the prana, pana, vyana, the udana, and the samana, etc. And then of course the namaskar yoga, where you bring the hands together in and apply pressure on each other. So all the acupressure points are involved in this. And as I said, the ida and pingala are coming together, the energy aspects on the left side and the material aspects on the right side. Whether without the material or without the energy, nothing is possible. Only the transaction between energy and material in the E is equal to mc squared formula of Einstein in relativity. You see that is essentially what's happening, and it's the amount of energies that are involved with even tiny masses, even subatomic particles, is so humongous. And that's what my Mahakali, my real mother, is all about. Vasanthi Ma and others are mothers of this birth, whether it is Jagima or Lallima or Chanuma, the Bhagyama, whom I've honored over various discourses in the past. They're all just rays of that Mahakali, the mother, universal mother, who in her creative form is Saraswati, and in her preserving form is Lakshmi. But essentially it's that dark energy of Mahakali which is the ultimate, far beyond even the dark matter of Shiva, the Shiva Tattva. Even though the Shiva Tattva is at the Sahasrara, the dark energy just engulfs it. Ardhanarishwara, you might think as Shiva taking Parvati and giving half his body, but in reality, when two halves come together, you can either say this half swallowed that half, or that half swallowed this half. It's equivalent to each other. But considering the amount of dark energy that's out there and the amount of dark matter that is out there, it's very clear who is the boss. And that even in your own family lives, those of you who are married or even who are children, and look at your parents, who that the mother is the boss always, right? So that's essentially what we are talking about over here. So that's asana. So I think we've covered quite a bit of that. So maybe we'll come to pranayama in the next discourse. So we will, as always, conclude with, let's say, so I've gone a little far deeper in this public episode than I have at the private episode. But of course, I covered a few aspects of pranayama there in addition, that which I will cover in tomorrow's class. Maybe a few points that I already told, I just recollect. Many people divide this word pranayama as pran ayama, and ayama means in ayama madidya means have you done exercises, and pran is the Hindi word where we always leave out the vowel at the end. Prana becomes pran, and so we are saying pran ayama is just a breath exercise. Yes, at the surface level, very superficially, it might look like a breath exercise that we are doing, whether it's the deep breathing that I already talked about, or in other episodes, not of kids series, but other series that I have already done in the message and massage, etc., as well as with different events that we've been posting on the Katham blog site as well, the spiritual blog site. All of these, we have covered some of these aspects of pranayama already, various different types of pranayama. We will talk about it in this channel as well from a different context of the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali Maharishi. But it's not just an exercise for the breath. That's what it seems like at the beginning. But as we deepen the practices, we will recognize that this is actually far deeper than that. It's affecting not just the prana, but apana, vyana, udana, samana, all these levels as well, and our very life energy, the vital energy as we call it. And it's a matter of life and death out there, my dear friends. When are you called? You're born. When you take your first breath through a cry, you come out of your mother's womb, the umbilical cord is cut, and you want to take that fresh air from the atmosphere, and that inhalation happens, and then the exhalation, of course, the last exhalation is death. So with this, we will conclude. I don't know if the recording is still going on. Wonderful. Great to see that the recording is still going on. So as always, we will conclude with 3 chants of Aum and follow it up, of course, with a Shanti mantra. Be with me. Sahanau bhunaktu sahaviryam karavavahai tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Aum Shanti Shanti Shanti. One bonus before we leave, for those of you who are suffering from insomnia, some of you have gotten in touch with me, and I would like to suggest there are many different techniques. One is to see if you can take a nice shower where you use lukewarm water, and you know that the shower, as I explained in one of the previous episodes, cleanses not only your physical body but your subtle body as well, and releases a lot of those emotional locks that you have got intertwined in. So both the physical and the subtle body, especially the psychological, gets cleansed, and therefore you'll be able to sleep much better. If you're still not able to sleep, go through this deep breathing technique that I taught you. Take as slow and deep inhalations as possible, retain it for a few seconds, and as slow and deep exhalations as possible, and retain the vacuum for a while. So do this for about a minute or two, and then in this Aum, we saw that it's made out of three parts: A, U, and And the A is for the waking state, U is for the dream state, and is for the deep sleep state. You don't want to get into the dream state, which is worse than being in the waking state, especially if you're getting into nightmares and sleepwalking and things like that. So let's see the typical insomnia cases. You want to mostly to get into the deep sleep state, and to do that, the is very useful. So you can just do either Bhramari Pranayama if you know that. If you don't know that, just reciting, take a deep breath. You'll surely put yourself to sleep. Maybe not only yourself, but others who hear this sound as well. So if you don't want to do that, maybe you can do it mentally also, these sounds. But extremely powerful. There are lots of other things that you can probably eat or drink before you go to sleep. Lavender oil, the smell helps, and so many other things. But you don't need many of these external interventions. Your body is the most wonderful entity which can create any one of these things, like serotonin, etc., which are created by our endocrine system. They're all secreted as and when we require, and out of those you can have a wonderful sleep as well. And even if you don't get sleep, don't worry. You're just depending on the statistics, and statistics is the worst thing that has happened to humanity, because in the way it is applied, of course it can be applied for very useful purposes too, but most people are applying statistics, especially in the health industry, to say what's the average BP of a human being of various ages, of various genders, what is the average heart rate, what is the average let's say various other parameters that people test, the pulse rate, the oxygen saturation become a very important thing these days, etc., etc. What's your normal temperature, etc. There is a range there, and we can operate out of that range. And sleep is also like that. You don't need necessarily so many hours of sleep each day. What matters more is, have you had a restful sleep? Have you gone into the deep sleep and waking up as a newborn baby, excited about life, to learn new things and to put your learning to practice to help out others and yourself? Are you in that kind of a frame of mind when you wake up? That is restfulness. And even if you sleep for 1 or 2 hours, many days I go without sleep continuously for 2 or 3 days. Maximum I've done is 3 so far. But even then I'm fresh and I'm able to do my things the way. And every year, of course, on Maha Shivaratri, millions of people in India and abroad remain awake, and they're so active and fresh the next day. They don't need to go to bed right after the night ends to compensate for their sleep. And for those who still cannot sleep but are feeling tired or not having a good time because of their insomnia, meditation is a great replacement for sleep. What you can do with many hours of sleep, you can do with just a few minutes of meditative state of mind. And slowly you start increasing that meditative state of mind. You will see that relaxation, whatever is required, that restfulness automatically happens. You don't need sleep at all. Because if the body needs sleep, yes, it will take it, and most of us do need it. It's very rare for people to go beyond, let's say, 3 days without sleep. You will need sleep because the body needs to recuperate at the physical level as well. It's not just at the psychological level, which to a large extent can be taken care of just through a meditative state of mind. But for the physical rest to happen, again, there are so many alternatives, and when the body needs it, it will get sleep. So you don't get worried about not having sleep or insomnia and keep popping these sleeping pills on all these external highly processed interventions that you're getting into your body. Take it for a toss, and the wonderful life that you have not only gets shortened, but the quality of life starts suffering. So let's avoid medication, surgeries and these things as far as possible. I myself have not been to a doctor or to a hospital or even to a pharmacist for that matter for the last 4 decades almost, and here I am, hale and hearty, touch wood. But what I'm talking about over here is a practical example that you can see. You don't need to depend on the medical industry and pharmaceutical industry and just keep helping their progress. Yes, they are important. They are also people involved in those industries. But the kind of investment that is going on into that, especially in these cutting edge hospitals and trying to make back the money with unnecessary surgical interventions, unnecessary medical interventions, psychiatric interventions, etc. A lot and lot of these things. Yes, there is a minority, there absolutely no doubt about it, that allopathic medicine is wonderful for emergency situations, and many people definitely need that, but that's a very, very small percentage of the number of people going for the allopathic system of medicine. But all you really needed, Ayurvedic system of holistic medicine is amazing, but even that I don't need. Personally, I don't take any Ayurvedic prescriptions as well. Why? Because the body generates all that is necessary, and if and only if you start making all of your 5 faculties cooperate with each other and utilize them as efficiently and effectively as possible, because once you have taken care of them well by proper understanding of what they are, then automatically they do their job. You don't need to interfere anymore. They just do their job wonderfully. And if intervention is required, you always have your remote control, my dear friends. You don't have one remote control, you have 2 remote controls. Bring them both together in a Namaskar Yoga and enjoy life. Life is a game, life is a movie. Just play, just enjoy. It's wonderful entertainment. You don't need any extra entertainment. This itself is a wonderful entertainment. Just relish it. Bye. See you in the next episode. Namaskar. Let me try to switch it off from here. If it's still recording, well, good, it's recording.